Okay, so following up my last video where I ran through my 50 favorite songs of 2023, I'm going to be doing the same for my albums of the year. We're going to do 50 once again. Like I mentioned in my last video, some of my favorite music and releases of 2023 have been from artists and acts that I wasn't really looking forward to dropping, and for me that surprise is always more exciting. We're going to get straight into it. First one, number 50 is The Rat Road by Subtract, and 49 is Why Does the Earth Give Us People to Love by Cara Jackson. 48 is Good Lies by Overmono. 47 is Blanket by Kevin Abstract, his first solo release since the end of Brockhampton. And 46 is Let's Start Here by Lil Yachty. 45, one of the most enigmatic people in music, kind of, Afterlife by Yeat. And 44 is Scarlet by Doja Cat with some really, really strong singles. 43 is Something to Give Each Other by Troye Sivan. I wasn't really a fan of Rush, the lead single, which everyone was hyping, but I thought the rest of the album was really, really strong. 42 is The Loveliest Time by Carly Rae Jepsen. And 41 is Pink Tape by Lil Uzi Vert. Number 40 is an album title I have to read off my notes because I can't remember the full name. Praise the Lord Who Chews But Which Does Not Consume or Simply Hop Between Worlds. A fucking mouthful by Yves Tumor. 39 is Vordir, I never know how to pronounce it, by Earl and The Alchemist. A super brief one with multiple track lists depending on where you get your music from. And 38 is one I couldn't leave out just because it's fucking fire. It's actually a film score by Daniel Pemberton, the original score for the new Across the Spider-Verse movie. 37 is Never Enough by Daniel Caesar, in my opinion, his best project since Freudian. 36 is the long-awaited debut of Cass Is Dead, Famous Last Words. And 35 is That Feels Good from Jessie Ware. 34 is Soft Scars by Yule, a unsettling but beautiful album in equal measure. 33 is My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross by Anoni and Anthony and the Johnsons. Just a gut-wrenching album that I only heard recently, but it hit me quite hard. 32, I don't know if this counts as cheating, but I don't care because the project is that fire. Like the EP by Ice Spice. Of course, she released the deluxe as well. It originally had 7 or 8 tracks. Had the deluxe with Delhi, one of the new singles. I love Ice Spice. I think she's super, super fucking fun. 31 is Paranoia Angels True Love by Christine and the Queens, an album that was almost entirely produced by Mike Dean. A very long album, but an amazing one. 30 is another original score for a film, one of the best films of the year, in my opinion. That's Ludwig Göransson's score for Oppenheimer. 29 is Red Moon in Venus by Kali Uchis. In my opinion, I think it might be my favorite Kali Uchis album since Isolation back in 2018. Number 28 is the latest album from Danish singer-songwriter Coco O called Sharing is Caring. One of the smoothest fucking albums you'll hear all year. Number 27 is Weed Killer by Ashnikko, her long-awaited debut. And 26 is Playing Robots into Heaven by James Blake. Halfway through this list, number 25, from an artist I'd never heard of. She also had one of my favorite songs of the year, All of This Will End by Indigo D'Souza. A really simple but effective approach to songwriting. I've gone back and listened to some of her other albums as well, which follow a similar formula, but this one I feel just has that extra emotional core, which, especially when you get towards the end of the album when the last track just blows you away. 24 is Obsidian by Drake's OVO artist Naomi Sharon. I played like 20 seconds of this for my mom and she was immediately like, is this Sade? Big time Sade vibes, but she gives it just enough of her own original spin and personality that it's not too derivative. There's some elements of R&B, some Afro beats, some soul of course as well, and I think it's a really, really consistent debut album. 23 is Raven by Kalila, her first album in ages, and this feels like more of an ethereal, contemplative take on dance music and R&B and soul, which if you've heard some of Kalila's music in the past, you might expect, but it's never been to this extent. This is one of the most relaxing things I think I've ever heard. Number 22 is the debut album from Pink Pantheress, Heaven Knows, one of the UK's most hyped artists, and I think for very good reason. Her debut album, or mixtape even, not even an album, her debut mixtape, To Hell With It, which dropped a couple of years ago, I thought was amazing. Since then, she's consistently been dropping singles, she's been collaborating with the likes of Ice Spice, she was on the Barbie soundtrack, she's been making some big waves, and I think this new album did live up to most of the hype that she'd garnered for herself. These new songs sound bigger, they sound like she's got a budget behind her as well. They're ambitious, they're more varied than some of her other releases as well. And, you know, I really appreciate the fact that she's stepping out of her comfort zone, working with producers you wouldn't necessarily think she'd work with, like Benny X. Some eclectic features like Kalila, previously mentioned, like Central C as well. Yeah, and I think this album is just a really, really refreshing take on pop music. Number 21 is from one of the most underrated rappers in the game, in my opinion, Navy Blue's new album, Ways of Knowing. Prior to the release of this album, I'd been introduced to his music through his album Post Panic, which dropped a few years ago, which was one of my favorite albums of that year. An album characterized by murky, gloomy instrumentals and Navy Blue's laid-back stream of consciousness, philosophical edge style of rapping. A style that a lot of people attribute to the likes of Earl Sweatshirt, but Navy Blue takes a more, I think, direct approach, a more emotive approach as well than some other artists. And on this album, he toes the line really well between showing off his, you know, amazing lyrical talent and just emotional gut punch after emotional gut punch. It's an album centered on his familial relationships more so than previous albums, and it makes for a really focused listen as well. Number 20 is one of the biggest albums of the year, probably the biggest like mainstream rap album of the year. That's Utopia by Travis Scott. What I did really appreciate about this album, especially on the first half, was Travis Scott sonically stepping out of his comfort zone. With certain instrumentals that we've never really heard him rap or sing over, like the opening track Hyena, Modern Jam as well, which was almost like a throwback late 80s, early 90s hip-hop song. And what I think you have to give Travis Scott props for is that when he promotes his music, he promotes it as this grand, ginormous spectacle. And when he delivers the music, it usually sounds like it fits that aesthetic. And like Astroworld, he makes use of extensive features. But what I think he did here is try and use some features you wouldn't necessarily think he would work with, or pair some features you wouldn't think work with. Like the last track has James Blake and 21 Savage on the same song. Musically, you know, it was a lot of Travis Scott trying out new things, trying to be as diverse as possible. It didn't pay off in every single instance, but for the most part, I think it did work really well. Number 19 is a live album. One of my personal favorite live albums now, just because I've been rinsing it all year. That's Live at SoFi by The Weeknd. The set list on this album is massive. There's about 30 songs spanning The Weeknd's entire career, right from House of Balloons up to Dawn FM. Some of these songs sound just as good as their studio counterparts, and some of the other songs he injects a bit more energy and urgency to interact with the crowd. And because The Weeknd has been like one of the world's biggest pop stars for almost a decade now, it plays a bit like a greatest hit selection. Of course, this was the tour for both After Hours and Dawn FM, but there's a healthy amount of Beauty Behind the Madness and Trilogy in there, and Starboy, of course. And when you sit down and listen to this album, like song after song after song, you're like, Jesus Christ. Like sometimes you sit back and you don't realize how many fucking hits The Weeknd has. Number 18 is Mitski's latest album, The Land is Inhospitable and So Are We. Now, I'll admit, I've been sleeping on Mitski. I've only heard one album, I think that was Puberty 2. I hadn't heard a lot of her other things. I only recently heard this maybe like a month ago. I fell in love with it immediately. It's such a personal album. It's moody, it's reflective, and it's eerie and cozy at the same time. Like it feels like a lot of these songs in my head feel like the kind of songs you'd play in the background of like a Christmas horror film. It feels Christmassy, and I don't know why. I don't know why, if it's just because I was listening to it in winter. I think the contrast between the lyrics and the songwriting and the instrumentation is fascinating, because it lures you into this kind of like false sense of security. So many instrumentals are warm and cozy and kind of small, but what she's singing about is at times really dark, with songs like I Don't Like My Mind particularly. It's a brisk, tight album as well. It runs, I think 35 minutes. Almost every song flows into one another amazingly. Number 17 is Beautiful and Brutal Yard by J Hus, his first album since Big Conspiracy, which was almost 4 years ago now. I love J Hus, I love Common Sense, and I loved Big Conspiracy. Big Conspiracy was one of my favorite albums of 2020. And I was kind of anxious about what direction he would go in next, because Big Conspiracy was such a low-key album in comparison to Common Sense. And I think this album is a really good middle point between the two sounds. There's very down-tempo, chill, almost romantic type tracks like Alien Girl and Fresh Water. And then there's other songs where he's just flexing his amazing pen game, like on Massacre or Comeback or Cream. Maybe It's Crazy kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because it's overtly the most aggressive and violent, maybe alongside Cream with CB. So I can understand for some people why those songs might be a bit jarring in the context of the rest of the songs, but there's just so many highlights on this album. Number 16 is Fountain Baby by Amaarae. This album is like candy. It's like ear candy that you can't get enough of. The grooves, her bizarre, distinctive voice, which is almost unlike anything I've ever heard before, but it's so distinct that you can't ignore it. It's a healthy mix of R&B, of soul, of Afrobeats, and pop. And what this album does, which I think is quite unique, is that like she comes with this, like I said, bizarre voice and vocal inflections that are structured in a way that are really quite accessible. Like, I think you could play this to someone who's maybe never even heard an Afrobeat song and they will fuck with it. And it's that willingness to be experimental and unconventional and futuristic and also make the type of songs that you can play at a house party, which makes her music just so addictive. Number 15 is the long-awaited second album from Sampha, Lahai. It really felt like Sampha took his time with this record. It doesn't sound like he was just recording non-stop and just picked out the best songs. This record was so personal and full of hope as well. Because Process was an album that I thought, it was a dark album, and it was really self-reflective, but there were some really dark moments like No One Knows Me Like the Piano and Chorusing specifically as well. And there are moments like that where on this album where he's dealing with loss and tragedy, but it's through the lens of hope and looking forward. And for me personally, even though it sounds impossible because Sampha's voice has always been fucking amazing, his singing sounds even better than it did on Process, and I'm not sure how. And of course Sampha, like he's done in the past, blends and meshes genres together to make his own sound. It's some R&B, some electronica, some jazz, some soul. And all these influences make the album feel just so rich and fluid and alive. Number 14, speaking of alive, definitely an alive album, 10,000 Gecs by 100 Gecs. One of the most batshit insane things I've heard all year, but I cannot get enough of some of these fucking songs. And in a weird way, I think this album is definitely more accessible than 1,000 Gecs. All of these songs have a really strong conventional pop structure underneath their otherworldly exterior. This album is one that wants to have fun and wants to let loose and just wants to melt your mind. Particularly with songs like Billy Knows Jamie, $1 Million, Frog on the Floor. Frog on the Floor is a song that's been stuck in my head all year. Bizarre moments, bizarre. I still remember when I first heard I Got My Tooth Removed, it opens with this really quite serene, beautiful ballad type section, and then it just bursts into this bizarre like vaudeville thing. I Got My Tooth Removed. 10,000 Gecs is definitely one of the most fun albums I've heard all year. Number 13, similarly to 10,000 Gecs actually, chaotic, bizarre, but fucking amazing. Scaring the Hose by JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, their long-awaited collaboration album. Scaring the Hose is nothing like JPEG Mafia or Danny Brown has ever worked on before. It really feels like lightning in a bottle, pure chaos, unfiltered, free energy. Of course, with the title being Scaring the Hose, they're very well aware of their online presence and their reception amongst, music nerds. It feels like JPEG Mafia challenged Danny Brown to rap over some of these beats because Danny Brown is one of my favorite and most versatile rappers in the world. But there are some, like the title track, which is my favorite song on the album, Scaring the Hose, fucking bizarre, insane. But it's one of the most intense Danny Brown performances I've ever heard. And JPEG Mafia holds his own as well. The way they bounce off each other, their chemistry on almost all of these songs is almost flawless. The album's very first line is, first off, fuck Elon Musk, which of course makes me love this album even more. Some of the most inventive and wild beats I've heard all year. The title track, Lean Beef Patty, Garbage Pail Kids, Jack Harlow, Combo Meal, some of the most hilarious titles as well. I think this delivered on every expectation I had on a collab album from these two and maybe exceeded them as well. Number 12, speaking of hilarious song titles, this actually might take the crown from Scaring the Hose. New Blue Sun from Andre 3000. one of the GOAT rappers, maybe the GOAT for me alongside Kendrick. But no raps, no rapping. This is a 90-minute new age jazz ambient flute album, or variety of woodwind instruments. Actually, it's not just flutes. When the album first came out, I was trying my very best to separate my bias, because Andre 3000 is one of my favorite, not even rappers, just artists of all time. Outkast, one of my favorite acts ever. So I listened to this on a long walk while I was like shopping. I started listening to it a lot while I was reading, and in my opinion, it's perfect relaxation reading music. But it's the kind of music where like you can pay your full attention to it as well, and it's still engaging. The songs creep, or I can't even call them songs. It's like they're pieces. They creep and they build, and they're light and airy. They're beautiful. They're very expressive. And just watching and listening to the way Andre talks about his process for this album and why he made this album, it feels really genuine and really sincere. And I understand maybe for some people who aren't used to listening to music like this, because it's not particular. This isn't the most experimental or crazy long ambient shit. Like there is some crazy fucking jazz ambient shit out there. But Andre 3000 is a giant mainstream artist. Outkast were one of the biggest selling like hip hop acts ever. Speakerboxxx The Love Below is like 15 times platinum. So he is an extremely popular artist. So there are people going into this who have literally never heard this kind of music before. And I think that's a really valuable thing to be an artist of that stature and introduce people to a whole new sound that they might not have ever heard before. I imagine now, like, people who might not have ever been exposed to this kind of music will listen to this and want to hear the influences. They might go and listen to Steve Reich, or they might go and listen to Brian Eno, or fucking Steve Roden, or all of these people, or Harold Budd. They might, and I think that's an amazing thing. But yeah, for the music itself, it's some of the most perfect reading music I've ever heard. Number 11 is coincidentally another one of my personal favorite reading albums I've heard this year. That's Everything Is Alive by Slowdive. Slowdive is a band I've always wanted to get more into. I've only heard Souvlaki and the self-titled that came out in 2017. I haven't heard any of the other releases. But because I liked their self-titled so much, I thought I'd listen to this album, and I think I enjoy it even more so. This album is like... it's like trance inducing for me. So many of these songs are so evocative, and they simmer and they boil, and they creep up on you as well. Like how emotive they are creeps up on you. You stick it on and it's not immediately obvious why these songs make you feel a certain way. And I think it's kind of, some of the feelings that this album evokes for me are kind of undescribable or ineffable. Like sometimes I feel like I'm sitting in the Microsoft Windows like green field. That's what I feel like. Other times I feel like I'm just like walking through rain in a nondescript city. That's not even from the lyrics, because when you listen to it, or like a lot of their music, like a lot of shoegaze music, you can't necessarily understand what they're saying until you read the lyrics. And some of the few lyrics we get, because there's an instrumental track, there's the song at the end, The Slab, which is just evocative wailing kind of, and the lyrics we do get are a bit ambiguous, kind of sad, kind of dreary as well, which matches the vibe of the album. But what they're able to do with this subtle mesh of their shoegaze sound with a bit of electronic elements as well, I think is fucking amazing. Into the top 10, number 10 is my second live album of this list. But this album is completely original material. That's Live at Bush Hall from Black Country New Road. I was unsure how they would progress without, their lead singer and songwriter. But this album shows that like there's such a collaborative, like democratic album where everyone shares these duties, and they've evolved. It doesn't sound like Ants from Up There or like For the First Time. The songwriting and delivery is not like Isaac Wood, really, but the essence and the spirit of it is still there, in that it's raw, it's unfiltered, it's evocative, it's emotional, and it's really personal. 9 tracks, most of these songs are like odysseys, especially like Turbine's Pigs, Laughing Song, which is one of my favorite songs of the year. Up song, the opening track, which is just like this rally of defiance. I know that they didn't want to release this on streaming. They wanted just the physical release and the recorded live album. I've got the vinyl as well, but I heard this first on Spotify. So they wanted it to be like that extra special thing, and I'm kind of sad that they didn't get that wish. But nonetheless, it's still, I think, just a collection of amazing songs. Number 9 is Scaring the Hose isn't the most Scaring the Hose album of this year. We Buy Diabetic Test Strips by Armand Hammer is the most Scaring the Hose album of the year. Coincidentally, speaking of Scaring the Hose, JPEG Mafia makes some contributions on this album as well. But what Elucid and Billy Woods do on this album with words is not normal. It's not normal. Both of these rappers are so distinct with their, not even their lyrics, their voices, but they paint this really dreary picture of 21st century America, which it feels, dystopian and alludes to just like the fucking post-truth era we're living in. And it's an album that's really hard to describe. Like if you haven't heard this album, and if you haven't, please listen to this album because it's fucking amazing. But it is really hard to describe. Like if you ask me the question, what is this album about? I would struggle to answer that question. It's about so many things. Obviously, a lot of the lyrics are quite abstract as well, but it feels like it's a paranoid album. It's a bleak album. It's dreary. It's some really, really adept and nuanced takes on the society that these two both inhabit. Over a backdrop of these instrumentals that are otherworldly, dreary, disturbing at times, but organic, and they feel like they're growing like the cordyceps in The Last of Us. It's a dark album, but it does have moments of levity in a kind of, a black humor kind of way. But it really is an album that it rewards you having your foot. I don't listen to this album often. I'm not gonna lie. I don't listen to it, every day. I don't have it slapped on like playlists. I'm like, I feel like listening to Niggardly, and then I'm gonna listen to some Travis Scott. And it's not that kind of album. And I think if you know Armand Hammer's music, it's not gonna be like that. It requires your full undivided attention. It's a perfect album for like if you're traveling somewhere, if you're going on a long walk. You're not going to slap this on while you're studying or anything. And it's so rewarding because it's sometimes some of these songs are like not deciphering a Rubik's Cube, because it's not like you have to work for it. It's just sometimes it clicks in a way where you hadn't even thought to connect that dot with that dot, or that observation with that observation, or like you're watching the news and then you go back and listen to that and like, oh, that thematically links to that, blah, blah, blah. And I get that with every listen of this album. Yeah, it's one of the best rap albums of the year. Number 8 is one of the best singer-songwriter albums of the year, in my opinion. Did You Know That There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard by Lana Del Rey. Off the bat, this is easily the best Lana Del Rey album since Norman fucking Rockwell, and I don't think it's close. This is a bit of a return to Lana's more moody aesthetics, because Norman fucking Rockwell was a bit more theatrical, I would say, than this. This feels more like she's sitting in a candlelit room singing these songs. Whereas Norman fucking Rockwell at times did feel quite summery and the most like poppy Lana Del Rey had been in years. And I still loved it as well. It was still like super expansive and stuff. But this feels like an expansion and evolution of some of the sounds she'd alluded to on Ultraviolence. The string arrangements and pianos on this album, I think, sound amazing. Her songwriting, I think, just keeps getting better and better. A&W, Paris, Texas, Let the Light In. Just a wide variety of songs as well. I've heard some people criticize this album for being a bit too samey and stuff, and I don't understand where that criticism comes from, because A&W sounds nothing like Let the Light In or like the final track, which ended up being a fucking remix / original version of Venice Bitch, which remains my favorite Lana Del Rey song ever. I think with this album, her songwriting has become so much more sophisticated and subtle than previous releases. It's ambitious as well. It's really ambitious, but there's something eerily comforting about this album as well. Number 7, we return to Mr. Billy Woods. Billy Woods and Kenny Seagal's Maps. This album is nowhere near as abstract as We Buy Diabetic Test Strip, where you have Billy Woods as our central protagonist going on this tragic hero's journey, touring and traveling around these places and feeling a really profound sense of isolation and loneliness and a search for meaning. It feels like Billy Woods' description of an out-of-body experience while he's going on tour and just stuck in these circles over and over again. And by the time he gets to the end of the album where he returns home, he's not happy there either. I feel this album is about the search for happiness or even just being content. But he does it with his trademark delivery and flair, which is unlike anyone else rapping in the world, in my opinion. The album cover is one of my favorite album covers of the year. I went on a flight maybe like 2 weeks after this album came out while I was listening to maps and like reading the safety instructions that you get in the back of the seat. Amazing experience. Number 6 is How Do You Sleep at Night by Teezo Touchdown. Now, I listened to this album quite late. I was on holiday in Canada when the album came out, so I had to wait like a week or two to come back. And I'd seen some of the initial reactions online and some reviews and stuff, and it was really mixed. The opinion of this album was really mixed. It didn't get the best reviews. It didn't sell very well. And I was like, oh, that's a shame, because Teezo Touchdown seems like a really talented person. Slapped on the eye. I love this album immediately. For me, at least, what this felt like to me was, I think I mentioned it in my favorite songs of the year as well. It feels like a guy singing his favorite songs in his bedroom and not giving a fuck. That's what it feels like. Aesthetically, it's a mesh of hip hop, R&B, 80s pop aesthetics. The lyrics on this album are so simple. Some of them are actually really sweet, like the song which is, like a seduction song basically, but like how he portrays this like dance before these two people get to bed is, I think, like genuinely so sweet and innocent. Like the lyric where he says, how many other girls has he give the let me use your mind, none of them were you. I think that is such a romantic lyric. I do know why, because it is. But the features as well, Janelle Monáe, Fouché, they kill their features. And there's a lot of variety as well. Like Mood Swings is like a fucking Rick James song. Impossible and Familiarity, upbeat, inspirational songs. And I'm hoping to get to see Teezo when he comes to London in March. And I think it will be an amazing live show, because so many of these songs I feel like are just built for like call and response audience participation. Yeah, You Thought, Sweet, Impossible, Neighborhood, Familiarity. The End Was Better, which is a strange song, which took a long time to grow on me, but I think a really consistent album, such a fun album as well. Like, it feels like a karaoke album. That's what it feels like, and it's so fun. It's just so fun. Into the top 5. Number 5 is one, when I first made this list, this was like maybe like 10, 15 places behind, but the more I listened to this album, just the higher up it got, the more it resonated with me. That's Javelin by Sufjan Stevens. Sufjan Stevens is someone, I've only heard a handful of his albums. I heard Chicago, I've heard The Age of Ads, and I've heard Carrion Low. 3 very different albums. So this is only the 4th Sufjan Stevens album I've heard. And I think it's my favorite. I think it's my favorite I've heard so far. It's the most lyrically straight to the point, but it's by far the most gut-wrenching. By far the most gut-wrenching album. Will Anybody Ever Love Me? Shit Talks, the opening track as well. But some of the vocal layering and the harmonies and the choruses and the choirs are so spectacular and theatrical. And it feels like it comes from a place of like just post-emotional exhaustion. I imagine that this album was a very cathartic experience for Sufjan Stevens. At the same time, it's quite a romantic album. It's expressive. It feels like it's trying to transcend something, maybe in terms of like spirituality or something like that. And I think it's the kind of album that can make you conjure emotions for things and experiences that you've probably not experienced yet, and you still feel that raw emotion. And it's the kind of album that I think like a lot of my favorite albums, it's hard to just take one song out and be like, this is the single, this is the one. It feels like one giant cohesive piece of music. It's 40 minutes, tight track list. My favorite Sufjan Stevens album I've heard so far, even above Carrion Low. And I know how much people love that album, and that is a really, really dark and depressing album. But this shit is just amazing. Into the top 4. Number 4, this came out right at the start of the year. I did a video on it as well. This Is Why by Paramore. Now, I will admit, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I never had a Paramore phase. I wasn't into them. It wasn't my vibe or anything like that. After Laughter came out when I was at university, it had the new wave 80s weird fucking synth pop shit. I love that sound. I gravitated towards that. Then I went back and heard a couple of Paramore's older things, and This Is Why is my favorite Paramore album by far, and it's not even close. But it's like a maturity of their original sound. It's got the 80s post-punk new wave kind of sound, the tight rhythms, all that stuff. But the songwriting is so different to anything I've heard from them before. Hayley Williams' voice, I think, has always been amazing. That's not something I've ever really questioned. But the way she writes about her views on the world, on the news. This Is Why, which feels like, the title track, a song about anxiety and, maybe in the wake of the pandemic as well. I feel like there's some allusions to that. Running Out of Time, which feels like, the ADHD manifesto. That's what it feels like to me. All of these things, like all these songs feel self-contained, but they build up a really fascinating picture at the same time. And the more the album goes on, it gets drearier and more down-tempo. The instrumentations become more loose and luscious as it goes on. Yeah, this album is every single song I love. It's an addictive album. It's a short album. Again, make your album sub 40 minutes. This is why. No pun intended. This is why you make your albums less than fucking 40 minutes. There's not a single moment wasted. There's not a single instrument wasted. Hayley Williams' vocal performances are amazing. The drums specifically are crazy. Into the top 3. Number 3, my favorite rap album of the year. The first album in 4 years from Mr. Danny Brown, Quaranta. Quaranta is kind of, like a companion piece to Triple X or 30 from 10 years ago. And, these two albums, I got to see Danny Brown at a Q&A. I got to ask him a couple of questions actually. And, he described it as the end of one chapter. These two albums bookend a specific period in his life. Triple X was when, he got big and, he fell into, addiction and what Atrocity Exhibition describes, the downward spiral. It's such an honest and straight to the point self-reflection and him taking accountability and responsibility for the things he's done and the mistakes he's made, but also has a really unique perspective on his world and the world that's changing around him. And I feel like the opening bar of the album where he says, this rap shit that saved my life then fucked it up at the same time, that pain in my heart I can't hide. That is the entire album. Like that, he runs with that for the entire album. And for fans of Danny Brown's more, eccentric delivery and rapping style, there are moments of that as well, particularly on songs like Tantor, but that's more the exception rather than the rule. Most of these songs are the most subdued we're probably ever going to hear Danny Brown, in my opinion. Jen's Terrific Vacation, which is just an amazing dissection of people being priced out of their own neighborhoods and gentrification. Celibate is amazing. Down With It, YBP with Bruiser Wolf, with one of the most amazing features of the year. And I think this is the most necessary Danny Brown album. As much as I love the eccentricity of albums like Triple X and Atrocity Exhibition, those were reflections. Like, people forget that, like, those aren't just stories. Like, when he's rapping on Downward Spiral or Ain't It Funny particularly, that's not just a guy rapping. Like, he's describing his real life, like real actual addiction. And now we've got to a point where he's able to make this album where he's taking responsibility for how certain things and decisions he's made held him back in certain aspects of his life, and now he's got through the other side and there's some hope. I think it's the best possible version of this album we could have got. I love this album, and I love the fact that this album exists because Danny Brown is now better physically and emotionally. My runner up. This was literally my number one until last week, and it came out at the start of the year. I was convinced this was going to be my number one, but nonetheless, it's still a fucking amazing album, and that's Desire I Want to Turn Into You by Caroline Polachek. First of all, the control that this woman has over her voice is ridiculous. Like, it's powerful, and it feels like if she sang, it would just go on forever into the universe. That's what her voice feels like. But her songwriting, I mentioned it in my last video. She said she wanted to make scorny music, scary and horny music, and it does sound like that at times. But just, I can't describe the genre of this album. It's a pop album. Of course it's a pop album, but I think that does it a disservice because it's so much It's so many things. I feel like calling this a pop album is accurate, but that's just scratching the surface because it takes so many inspirations from electronic music, from folk music, from gypsy music, from like Celtic music and fucking choral music and all of these things. And the way she writes about love and intimacy and desire, of course, is so amazing. I don't know what other word to describe it as. It's just fucking amazing. At times, you don't know where this album's going. It can take some inspiration from like trip hop. At times, it sounds like some 2000s noughties Euro shit. Individually, these songs are structured flawlessly. I Believe, Sunset, Smoke, Welcome to My Island, Billions, Bunny is a Rider. Bunny is a fucking rider. I know that song came out almost 2 years ago, but I didn't. It placed in the context of the album, it made me appreciate it so much more. And some of the songs are more abstract than others, but some of them, particularly Smoke, which might be my favorite, this just like blissful, willful ignorance kind of thing. Welcome to My Island, where the opening track, where it's just like just a pure expression of the very human thing that it is to desire things. What this album feels like is like pop music. Like the album is pop music, and like every song like bursts a seam in the fabric of pop music, and then like you get like a Latin Spanish guitar here, and then you get some bagpipes here, and then you get some gypsy music here, and it just like explodes into like a transcendence of pop music. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but that's genuinely what it feels like to me. I fucking love this album. And number one, when I first made this list, this was, I'm not even lying, this was like number 25. And I go back to it, and I can't lie to myself anymore how much I fucking love this album. My number one, my favorite album of the year is Guts by Olivia Rodrigo. When I first heard Sour, there were a handful of songs I really enjoyed, and I thought she was really talented, but I thought it was quite I thought it was relatively inconsistent, but I still really enjoyed, especially the singles like Good For You, Deja Vu, Brutal, Jealousy, things like that. But I didn't think it really worked as a whole album. It felt a bit disjointed. And this album is fucking ridiculous. I think it's pop perfection. That's what I think it is. But the first thing that strikes me about this album is that like it's a big album. It's a major label album from one of like pop's biggest up and comers. Like it's a big deal album in terms of numbers and sales, and when she goes on tour and all of these things. But like she still allows herself, along with her producer, to be imperfect at moments, like where like at points like the guitars sound like almost like they're about to blow out on some songs, like the opening song. And she's not afraid to like leave in some vocal quirks where like her voice might break for a second or creak or squawk. And it provides a genuine feeling that this album is a raw expression of genuine emotions. And of course, this album is, Olivia Rodrigo is a very young artist. I think she's only just turned 20. So this was written in that transitionary period between teenagehood and adulthood. And it really does feel like that. And, when you're that age, these emotions that you're feeling are super fucking intense. And the way that's translated into song form, I think, is amazing. Vampire is the lead single. When I first heard it, I liked it. In the context of the album, I fucking love this song. I think the vocal performance is amazing. The way the drums come in is beautiful. The songwriting, Olivia Rodrigo's songwriting, I think was the strong point of Sour, and I think it's improved like tenfold on this album. I think the songwriting is ridiculously good. I don't think you need to quantify it as it's ridiculously good for a pop album. No, it's just good. It's just amazing songwriting. And that's a theme that she alludes to on the closing song, with lyrics like, when will I stop being great for my age and just start being good? When am I going to stop being a pretty young thing to all these guys? And, being a person that young in the limelight, in this extremely bright limelight, must be bizarre. But I think that lyric about when am I going to stop being great for my age and just start being good, I think that's something that's a universal theme Because, you know, a lot of times people like to quantify things, whether it's, you know, a piece of art that someone makes, a movie, a song, a film, a piece of work that someone does just in your workplace. They'll, you know, it's a very common thing to be, oh, that they're very good considering that they're only X years old. And it's like, you don't need to quantify it. It's like Olivia Rodrigo is an amazing songwriter. She's not amazing. Oh, she's amazing for a 19-year-old, for a 20-year-old. She's just a very talented person. And I think it's that awareness of the outside world, but also like reflected within, which makes her songwriting really mature. At the same, some of the other songs, I think her sense of humor is really spot on, especially with songs like Getting Back, which I mentioned in my favorite songs of the year. Hilarious lyrics on Getting Back. And I think that the album has a really, really healthy balance between evocative, emotional ballad type songs and late 90s, early 2000s pop punky songs, but with a contemporary twist to them. And she's not afraid with some songs to challenge herself vocally, specifically on a song like Lacy. The vocal layering is quite bizarre. It's eerie. It's a song about self-image and insecurity and comparing yourself to others. And it's weird that song is placed after Vampire as well, because it feels kind of vampiric, the way this person she's describing is obsessed with this other person, and the way society tells you to look and be and feel as a young woman, you know, can really mess with you emotionally and mentally. I love every song on this album. Lacy, All American Bitch, Get Him Back, Vampire, Pretty is Pretty, The Grudge, Love is Embarrassing is an amazing song. Logical is an amazing song. And I think this album proves that Olivia Rodrigo is the real fucking deal. Like, she's no joke. She is already one of the biggest pop stars in the world, and she will continue to be, because this album is fucking amazing. Okay, so I'm just editing this video right now, and I forgot that I didn't do an outro, so that's what I'm doing now. Let me know what your favorite albums of the year are. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, dong the bell, and I will see you in 2024.